Round of applause to Miss Mary Vasquez.
Okay, so this was a little tall. Good morning. I'm so happy to be here to kind of share this information for each and every one of you. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about stress and anxiety. How many of us can kind of admit to experiencing that on a day-to-day basis? For sure, right? So if we experience it, then our children are experiencing it as well, okay? So we're gonna talk a little bit about what the differences are, how to see those symptoms in our children, and then we're gonna kind of practice a little bit more of those techniques as well in this ever-changing world, right? Even though we continue to, I don't wanna blame COVID, but I kind of wanna blame COVID a little bit, right? So even though now it's been a couple of years after, we're really noticing how much the pandemic has really affected not only us as adults, but our children as well. The isolation, not being able to go to school, and then now having to readjust and start to get back into what that is, the fears that our children are experiencing. They're really real. You know, the statistics have really just skyrocketed when we think about anxiety and stress and even burnout and what all these terms mean, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of go through, no, this is not a movable mic. So when we talk about, go back, okay. So when we talk about stress and anxiety, there's surely a difference between what is stress, what is anxiety, and what leads into what we call burnout, okay? So when we talk about emotional stressors and we talk about that, stress is really an external trigger, okay? It's something that is caused from the outside in. And I think that sometimes stress can be healthy. Who agrees with that? Who thinks that sometimes, not all the time, that stress can be healthy? I have a few back there, okay? How many of us believe that stress is very unhealthy? Okay, so I'll get into the experiences as to why. So like for me, even though I'm up here and speaking to you all, it's a little stressful to be up here, right? I'm on the spotlight, so that nervousness sometimes can be very motivating. And that's why sometimes stress can be slightly motivating, and it's very natural, right? Especially with our children when they're performing, you know, they're in class. It's very normal that we feel just slight bit of stress. But when it starts to become a little dangerous, okay, is when it starts to now be accompanied by what we call anxiety. So when we talk about the stress, here are just some symptoms for you to kind of just look at. But when we talk about it, it could be very short term, a disagreement, a fight with a friend, coworker, you know, issues and things like that. All those small things are gonna cause some underlying stress, okay? But then what happens to us is, here are just some examples of some stressors. Okay, bills, work, headaches, promotions, family, children. I'm sure all of you have experienced this one way or another. Okay, technical difficulties. So here comes anxiety. Anxiety, and I see it a lot in our young children. Our numbers have skyrocketed of how many clients, being a licensed mental health counselor, of how many children I treat that have anxiety and don't understand it. Don't identify it in their bodies, don't identify it when they're home, in school, not really just understanding what's happening to them, okay? So lots of times when we talk about anxiety, it is definitely something that is there that is not being caused necessarily by an external trigger. Okay, it's something very persistent. It's something that continues on and on and on. It's the worry. when we think about our children and we think about the things that they may be worried about, I know sometimes it's difficult to believe that our children are actually worried about things. But they do. They worry about their grades. They worry about the circle of friends that they're in. They worry about home environments. They worry about what's being seen in society, okay? The internet is huge when we talk about anxiety, our TikTok wars, and all these different things that our children are being exposed to, okay? And we can't ignore those things. They're very real. And sometimes with our children, especially our younger ones, when we talk about that K through 5, and we really, when they start to respond in a way of acting out or yelling and screaming, here come the tantrums, all those things, we have to not ignore that could be anxiety that even our young children are feeling. Okay, so the idea is to really start to teach them what their body symptoms are, what is it that anxiety looks like, because it's not just what they feel in their bodies, but it's also their thoughts as well that is going to lead into those things. So how many of you have experienced, I don't know the age range as far as our children here, but how many of you can say that you kind of have to, when you think about your children and you're looking at your children, that you have to kind of question whether or not they're really experiencing what we call anxiety? So we have 1, 2, okay. So what are some things that maybe, not to take up too much time, but I love to open it up to you all as well. What are some things that you all see sometimes, the challenges in your children? They withdraw, yeah, for sure. And that could look very, when we talk about our children being in their rooms, I know our teenagers are very known for that. They get into that stage and they start to hide away. But I think that as parents, because if I take my counselor hat off and I put my mom hat on, we really have to be in tune when our children start to isolate into their rooms and not come out, those eating habits and things like that. Thank you for that. Anybody else back there? Separation anxiety. That is a huge one. Okay, again, I don't want to blame COVID, but I'm going to blame COVID again, right? Because that is huge when our children are experiencing separation anxiety from the parents, okay? What are some things that you see in your child? Crying. Crying in school. Not wanting to get out of the vehicle.
Anxiety just before even going to school. Just, I'm going to miss you, Mommy. I don't want to go to school, Mommy. Can I stay with you? Can I go to work with you? And I mean, months. So
months of that. That's difficult, right? I can't imagine as a mom, thank you so much for sharing that, how difficult that is when you've got to go to work, you're trying to prepare, and now your child is having a tantrum in the car loop trying to get out of the vehicle. That's tough, okay? Because as a parent, even though we know that going to school is a plus, right? We have to have them, get their education, but at the same time, it's almost like, why can't you just go? It's okay, we do this on a daily basis. But it's so difficult sometimes for children, especially because of everything that they've been going through these last 2 going on 3 years, what that feels like, that fear to go into the school, that fear to just socialize with other people. Okay, very difficult, but today I'm gonna say that we're really gonna practice how to work through some of those anxieties, and it's also us teaching it. Okay, because I think that as a parent, and I'm going to kind of point at you, I'm not picking on you, but you've got some good information. So what is it like for you as a parent sometimes to go through that with your child?
for me, I was pushing her to just go, and now.
Take your time with it. Okay. So
I think I blame myself sometimes. So.
yeah.
I don't know, so I'm just working with counselors, working with teachers, so it's turned into test anxiety, it's turned into just a whole
Slew of things. Yeah. Thank you so much. So how many of us can relate to that? That sometimes as a parent, you just feel really lost. You want to push your child, but you don't really know what else to do. I've got somebody in line over there saying, yes, that's totally me. Okay, it's very hard to do that because as a parent, we don't want to push them, but at the same time, what are we supposed to do? We have responsibilities, right? So that's so difficult sometimes, and I can say I really relate to that. And I'm going to say that I cannot ignore that there are other parents in the room that can also relate to that as well. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay. So now the question is, so is all stress negative? So we kind of talked about that already. So now I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about that combination of that stress and anxiety. Okay. So many times, not only in just our children, but in our parents and young adults and older adults, I hear a lot of, well, I'm just exhausted. I have just fatigue. It'll be okay. I'm just tired. Okay. When you have stress and that anxiety combined, it is burnout. So what I'm going to say is that if you have reached already the level of fatigue, then you have surpassed what we call burnout. Okay? Once you get into that state of mind, as well as our children, they're just tired, low energy, low motivation, you have far gone what we call the symptoms that were supposed to be noticed way before. Okay? So when I hear parents and people say that fatigue, or I'm just burned out, your car alarm is no longer going off. The car is literally on fire now. Okay? So when you have parents, or you maybe as adults or your children, and you start to feel this fatigue, and you say to yourself, oh, well, I'm just going to go get rest. I just need to get a better night's sleep. How many of us have experienced that? Yeah, as a licensed mental health counselor, I've experienced that very much so. Okay? And if that has happened to you, then know that it's not because now you're trying to get rest. Your body is telling you no more. Okay? You're almost being forced to go get rest, being forced to take a day off, being forced to kind of push through. So what I'm saying is, don't push through. That is your body saying it is time for vacation. It's time to take some time off. It's time to maybe start to engage in some physical activities. I know that exhaustion sometimes seems like, why would I want to go exercise? But it is us trying to kind of build out those toxins that have been rebuilt into our system. Okay? So if you start to see that in your children, then know that you have surpassed stress. You have surpassed anxiety. Now you're moving into what those stages of burnout is. And our children experience that, okay? School projects, having to be in school activities, ROTC, whatever else is out there, clubs, all this pressure with certain things. Our children try so hard to be engaged, but if you start to see them kind of slow down with those things, then understand that our children are burnt out. Just the anxiety alone of trying to fit in and the peer pressures that they have is huge. Okay? So if we start to ignore what those symptoms are, then know that you're starting to enter into that stage of burnout. Okay? But I have good news. So I always like to say that because there's always reprieve when it comes to good news. But here are some numbers for you. So I'm not going to necessarily read them. I'm just going to give you a few minutes to kind of just go through that. But Stress in America did a study worldwide that had a lot to do with anxiety and stress and what our children and parents have been experiencing. What do you all think about those numbers? Do you think normal, high, pretty low? What are your thoughts about that? If we look at it, 63% don't even uncertainty about the causes of what stress is. 63%, that's pretty high. 49% said that future plans feel just absolutely impossible. That's almost half. Okay, so these numbers should be really shocking to us. It's shocking to me even looking at them again. And 32% of adults struggle with just basic decision-making day to day. Just basic decision-making. What are we eating for dinner? I don't know about you guys, but I know sometimes that could be really stressful when you have activities and you're picking up children and you're coming home and work is still going and phones are ringing and you have activities. Okay, day to day sometimes decision-making is hard. And I'm okay with admitting that. Like, I can admit that, totally. Crock pots are great. Microwave dinners work in my house, okay? And every once in a while, it's okay to do that. So here are just some more numbers for you. But what I really want to get into is, what can we do? What do we do when we're falling through the cracks? What do we do when we're seeing this in our children? What do we do with that? So I like to go ahead and just talk about heal. And this is just a really good concept, and it's so powerful. So honoring our mental health, it's calling it what it is. You know, who was it that sang that song, Destiny? Say my name, say my name. Let's call it what it is, right? It's okay to say mental health. There's so much fear around the word mental health. Mental health is very common. It does not mean that you're schizophrenic. Those are high mental health disorders. Stress is mental health. Anxiety is mental health. Depression is mental health. Okay, it's not a label, but what it does is it helps us to identify the things as adults, not only that what we struggle with, but what our children struggle with as well. So I think that in society today is really teaching our children that mental health is okay to say. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what those things are. I don't think that we educate enough at our dinner tables when our children are experiencing these mental health symptoms. Empowering ourselves. It's really being mindful of not only the words that we say, but being really in tune what our children are saying. Okay? They're so concerned about how they look, what they eat, what they're looking at, you know, friendships, what do I say, the shyness, all these different things, all these stressors that have, but the negative self-talk in our children, it is shocking. If I look back to past history to where we are today, how many of our children come in with low self-esteem? Okay, it's so prevalent. We have to notice that. When we see our children saying, oh, well, I'm ugly. Oh, well, I'm this. Oh, hold on a minute. Okay, we have to really be that intervening person. And as much as we can tell them, you're beautiful, you're this, you're that, it is teaching our children to say that to themselves. Mirror work is huge. How many of us are familiar with what mirror work is? Okay, we have one, two, we have a couple, right? So mirror work is so powerful, because if we can teach our children, our sons, our daughters, to look in the mirror every day and at least say one positive thing about themselves, you're already increasing their self-esteem. It is difficult for our children sometimes to look in the mirror and just notice positive things. How many of us as adults have experiencing looking in the mirror and you pick out everything that's wrong? That's totally me. I'm like, ugh, this, that, ugh. You know, you start to do all these things. It's almost a natural thing. But we don't really realize and notice that that negative self-talk builds up. And it piles up, and it piles up, and it piles up. So we have to be so conscientious that when we're doing that, we're actually also modeling now what we're teaching our children. So the idea is that every time they look in the mirror, when they're brushing their teeth, when they're getting ready for school, whatever that is for them, that you take just a second to really sit with them and have them identify positive things about themselves. And if you do that once a day for the rest of the week, 5 days a week, 7 days a week, however you want to teach that, you are going to just really notice that self-esteem start to come up. Activate mindfulness. You know, when we talk about anxiety and we talk about stress and we talk about burnout, it is so important that we start to teach our children how to center themselves. In order to center, we have to be really mindful of what's around us. As counselors, we call that grounding techniques. We tap into those 5 senses: what we see, what we smell, what we touch, what we hear, and what we taste. All of those things are grounding techniques that we can start to teach our children. Being mindful of what they're looking at, being mindful of their surroundings. So when your child is going through some anxiety, as some of you have already shared, those temper tantrums, not wanting to get out of the car, different things like that, take a moment and have them practice some mindfulness. Closing their eyes, just being really in tune with their breathing. All of these things help our children to center themselves, but us as well. Because just know that the energy that's around us is around our children, and the energy that's around your children, it's inevitable that we're going to feel those things as well. So in order to kind of work through these tantrums and work through these things is to really be mindful of just helping them to just center in that moment. It takes just a few seconds to do that, okay? The last thing, of course, is love ourselves, that positive self-talk every day, kind of like that mirror work of what I was saying, okay? Even at the dinner table, going around and having everyone just say one thing about themselves that's positive is so powerful for our children and for us as well. So here are some tips for managing. These are just some familiar ones. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Jessica Jones. She's a master's level student at Liberty University. Come on, you all, give it up for Jessica. She is our future. So she's going to come around and just pass some sheets for you to look at coping with anxiety. And we're going to kind of go over a little bit of what managing that is, okay? So we like to practice that with you all, because the more that we practice it and show our children, the more they're going to be comfortable with practicing these things. You know, relaxation techniques, breathing techniques, a workout routine, meditation, all these things are so helpful when we're working with our children. But I think the biggest thing that we need to recognize that is just not practicing it in the moment. So even though our children, us as well, when we're going through anxiety and we're going through those things, you want to practice that with them in the moment that they're having that moment, you know, of whatever that anxiety and that stress is. But the idea with meditation, the idea with centering, the idea with grounding is it's something that they have to practice on a daily basis when they're not experiencing the stressor, okay? And the reasons why is because if you start to get into a routine of practicing that when you're not having the moment, okay, then they're automatically going to start to teach not only just their body, but their thoughts of what needs to happen when they are experiencing that moment. Does that make sense? Okay, so the idea is we have to practice that with them in those moments after dinner, right before bedtime, first thing in the morning when they're having breakfast. So it's practicing those things with them on a daily basis if we have to, especially if you see that your children are struggling with that anxiety and with those stressors, okay? Because the idea is that the patterns that they've gotten into with high anxiety, the crying, the isolation, the separation anxiety, you know, having moments in the car loop or whatever that is that you're experiencing, the idea is that somewhere along the line, they created that habit. They created that pattern. So it's almost like they can't help sometimes. I know sometimes as parents we're like, would you just stop? But honestly, sometimes they have created this habit that their mind automatically goes there. So the idea is for us to break that cycle in our children is for us to start to practice those things with them on a daily basis. If you're practicing mindfulness and meditation, breathing techniques at least 3 times a week with our kids, you're going to be surprised on what that's going to do for them. Not only for just self-esteem, but also they start to learn to practice that when they're stressed in school, when things are happening in friend circle, when things are happening in activities. So the idea for you is to start to practice those things with them at least 3 times a week. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and have Jessica come up. So I know that sometimes when we think of breathing techniques, we think about, oh, well, it's just breathing. Like, what is that gonna do? But you'd be surprised that just practicing a simple breathing technique with our children opens up what our body, opens up our lungs, allows the airflow of oxygen to go into the brain, which is so helpful because it's going to bring down what that anxiety is. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to kind of have you all join with us. So if you have a purse or something around you, just push that to the side, kind of give yourself some space. It's okay to move, it's okay to practice this, I promise you. It's just gonna take just a few minutes, okay? So I'm gonna have Jessica come up and just practice a basic breathing technique with you all.
Hi everyone. So this is for the second page of tips of managing anxiety and stress. The first one's de-escalating yourself. I think when we think of breathing, I hear a lot of my own clients say, breathing doesn't help, breathing doesn't help. I want to say you're probably not diaphragm breathing. Does anybody know what diaphragm breathing is? So diaphragm breathing is actually when you are breathing and you take a deep breath in, normally our chest goes up. So you want to make sure that your belly is going out. I know that, and it takes a lot of practice, but when you're doing it and you take a deep breath, a good measure is to put your hand on your belly, and it's a lot harder than you think. Take a deep breath. Does your belly go out? That's diaphragm breathing. So I think one of the main key points is when we're breathing, it's to help us like kind of get back to the homeostasis level and to just really realize that breathing that's not going to work. You need the diaphragm breathing, okay? So I would like to practice that with all of you. It does say to repeat 10 times. I think that's a little excessive. I do it about 4 or 5 times, but it is whatever works for you. So I would like to practice it with you. We're going to diaphragm breathe, making sure our bellies go out. We're going to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, and slowly breathe out for 6. This really makes sure that you're taking the time to get back to that homeostasis level that you want to be at. So we could go ahead and try it. And I want to try 2 more times. And once more. Okay. Did anybody notice a difference with that breathing compared to when you're just taking deep breaths with your chest rather than your belly?
Totally.
Yeah, there's a big difference, right? So that's one of the main and scientific-based reasons to get you back to that level. Does anyone have any questions on that before I go to the next one? Okay, so the second one is focus on yourself. So this is basically a tip of when you have racing thoughts that normally occur with anxiety, it's really hard to shut your brain off. You have those thoughts where even though you're trying to stop, your brain's not working with you, right? So I think for children, it would be a little hard to go from 100 to 97 to 94. So make it work for your age level of child you have. For example, if they know how to count to 10, start from 10 and go backwards. This is basically just to reframe your brain to just pause in the moment, and it distracts itself. So eventually, when you keep practicing it, it's going to get back to like, okay, I did the breathing, I did the counting. You have to find what works for you. For the third one, relax yourself. And I think Mary talked about, practicing that mindfulness. And mindfulness is one of the biggest attributes of getting your body back to that calming state. So actively relaxing our muscles can increase energy, flexibility, and that's just, you choose a body part and tense it. If it's your shoulders, I don't think we realize how stressed we are. We normally hold it in our shoulders, in our chest, and so just if you really tense it, hold it for 10 seconds, and then you let it go, you kind of are like, oh, all right. So I think that's a big one. When Mary talked about grounding yourself, people do this in many different ways: mindfulness, meditation. As far as a quick scan of your body, she talked about the 5 senses. So focusing on our physical surroundings. You know, we want the 5 senses of what in that moment do we hear? What in that moment do we taste? Are we chewing gum? Are we sucking on a candy? Are we thirsty? What about touch? What can we feel? A lot of people are sensory learners, which means children especially. When they are having these fits and you just can't calm them down, it's sensory learning a lot of times that they need. They need a new environment. They need something they can hold. They need an ice cube in their hand, something to distract your brain just like you as adults would. As for smell, ask your children, what do they smell? What are you smelling right now? We're driving to school. What do you see out the window? What do you see in the car? What's mom or dad doing? What are they talking about? It's anything to distract your brain from the negativity to get it back to the homeostasis like I talked about. Lastly, I would say celebrating yourself. I think we teach our children to celebrate themselves, and I think as parents, we rarely do that. I think how our children act are learning behaviors of what they learn from us as parents. So children hearing you as parents talk positively about yourself, you know, we have a lot of girls that I've even had clients where they say, well, my mom's always talked about herself like this. My mom's always called herself this way. They learn behaviors that way. So if they see us positively talking about us and celebrating our little victories, they will learn that to celebrate their little victories. So I think that's a really important aspect of you are their learning environment, and that's what you want them to grow up to be as. So anytime you catch yourself negatively talking about yourself or anything and not celebrating your small works, would you be happy if your children were doing that kind of thing, right? You got to celebrate yourself like you would celebrate your children. That's as far as I have it. Does anybody have questions for me?
So we'll open up to questions in just a minute.
Okay. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you, Jessica. So I like to kind of go back and just focus a little bit on the last two. So when we talk about grounding yourself, another technique that you can teach your children about mindfulness is allowing them to create what we call a safe space. And that safe space is going to be in their mind. So, and this is an exercise that you can do with them. So it is closing your eyes. So I like you all to kind of take a second with me again, okay? And we're just gonna practice this. So I like you to go ahead and just close your eyes for me. Just humor me for a second, okay? Just close your eyes. And what I like you to do is just be mindful of that breathing once again. That air coming in through your lungs, in through your nose, and out through your mouth. And what I'd like you to do is to take yourselves to a safe space. It could be a memory that you have as childhood. It could be a moment, an experience that you've had with your child. It could be whatever memory or whatever safe space that you enjoy, whether that's at the beach, listening to music, whatever that is for you. And I'm gonna give you just a few seconds to kind of allow yourself, as you continue to breathe, to kind of just enjoy what that memory is. It's being in tune with the room, being in tune with what that felt like, enjoying just that moment of relaxation. Take one last nice deep breath, and when you're ready, you can go ahead and open your eyes. What are some experience that you all had just practicing that exercise? We did it for just a few seconds. What was that like for some of you? I'm sorry? Peaceful. Calming. Anybody took themselves to their childhood? Any memories from that? Okay, we have one back there. Yeah. So if we take the time to practice that with our children, practicing that safe space with them, they can allow themselves in those moments of high anxiety and stress to be able to just take a few seconds and go there. And it's something that you can practice with them at night, bedtime, during those dinner moments, turning off the TV and just taking the time to practice that. It's huge when you teach our children that mindfulness is a real thing, and it does help with not just anxiety and stress, but in those moments that they're feeling a little burnt out. Okay? And then the last thing is celebrating yourself. Another thing that you can practice with your children is a gratitude jar. How many of us have heard of what that is? We have one, two, we have a couple. So when we practice gratitude with our children, even the smallest things, you would be surprised on how easily your child's mood will start to change. It's so easy for us to go around and say everything that's going wrong, all the negative things that aren't going right, all those things. It's very easy to do those things, okay? And sometimes we can get stuck in that. But if we start to kind of practice gratitude with our children, they start to learn that everything is not just focusing on the negative things or everything that goes wrong in their lives, but they're also able to recognize even the smallest positive things, okay? So I really encourage you to create a gratitude jar with your child, a prayer box with your child, or a gratitude box with your kids, and each day have them do that. Allow them to enjoy what it is to put all that together. Putting in sticky notes next to that and having them do that every day, whether it's before they go to school or after they come back, whatever that is for them. These are different techniques that really do teach our children to not allow anxiety and stress to take over and manage their lives, but it teaches them for us to start to learn, and our children start to learn to really cope and really start to manage the anxiety, because anxiety and stressors are going to be inevitable, okay? But there are moments that anxiety is prolonged. And when it starts to get prolonged, as they continue to develop and grow, now that becomes part of their lifestyle. And we want to break that cycle. But in order to do that, as adults and as parents, it has to start with us first. Okay? So that's kind of my part. Here are some more helpful tips for you all. Setting boundaries, scheduling me time, taking breaks at your job, making sure that you're practicing mindfulness at your job. It takes just a few seconds. And avoid caffeine. I don't know about you, but that's difficult. But we can certainly limit what caffeine is. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of just